A string of murders between 1911 and 1912 created a culture of fear and chaos in Louisiana. Investigators thought they had their man. He didn't put up much of a fight during his own trial, and even his own family testified against him. It turns out he wasn't actually responsible for murdering all of those African American families with an axe, but someone close to him was trying to make sure he took the fall in the name of the church. It's 10-Minute Murder, brief and bingeable true crime. I'm Joe, the host, and thank you for joining today. I appreciate you. Well, not all of you. Some of you. One person in particular today, I heard say the word orange. That's not even a word. It's orange. All I've eaten today is an orange. Shut up. It's orange. Say the right words. And I know that's pretty rich coming from a guy that can't pronounce most names beyond the basic ones, as evidenced by this podcast. Anyway, even if you say orange, welcome, I guess. But if you say espresso around me, I'm punching you in the mouth. If you're new to listening to 10-Minute Murder, I don't normally make violent threats every episode. That was just a surprise bonus just for you. But make sure you subscribe to 10-Minute Murder to ensure that you don't miss any future episodes. And it also helps to subscribe when you want to go and back and binge on some of the past shows as well. Connect with me on social media. I post visuals that go along with the episodes, as well as other true crime news as happens around the country. There's also a link in the show notes of this episode for the 10-Minute Murder merch store if you want to pick up a t-shirt or something like that. All right, now to today's story. On February 3rd, 1911, a gruesome discovery was made in Crowley, Louisiana. The bodies of a young African-American family were found in their home, murdered with the blunt side of an axe after the perpetrator climbed through a back window, cutting short the lives of Walter J. Byers, his wife, and his child. Just 3 weeks later, 30 miles east of this first incident, another African-American family, the Andrews family, was murdered in their home in Lafayette. They were all found lying in the bed and had been bludgeoned to death with the blunt side of an axe, which was found on the floor next to the bed. This time, 6 people were killed, and it would take the police only days to make an arrest. Raymond Barnabet was the main suspect in the crimes. He lived with his partner, Dina Porter, 2 sons, and his daughter, Clementine Barnabet, just a few doors down from where the Andrews family lived. He was arrested for the murders, but released when investigators could not find enough evidence to make a case against him. And the chief detective in charge of the investigation went on to announce that he believed the murders of the Andrews family had been caused by feelings of either jealousy or revenge, and that they more than likely had more than one perpetrator. A month later, this time 400 miles west of Lafayette, in a town that was connected by railway lines, another African-American family was found murdered in their beds with the blunt side of an axe, which was also left at the scene. This time it would be a family of 5 who lost their lives. In July of that year, Raymond Barnabet was rearrested for the murders of the Andrews family, and this time investigators were ready to take him to court. He went on trial in October, where he never took the stand in his own defense. Instead, he would sit, looking openly dejected and defeated, as witness after witness was called to testify against him. A few of the only words he was actually recorded as saying out loud, or loud enough for the jury to hear, were "goodbye" and "mo funtu," or "I am gone." And he had a pretty good reason to feel that way, because 3 of the witnesses called to the stand to testify against him were his partner, Dina Porter, his son Zephyrin, and his daughter, Clementine Barnabet. They gave a mismatch of testimonies, often contradicting each other, but the witness that stole the show was his daughter, Clementine. She claimed that her father had arrived home the night of the Andrews family's murders with his clothes covered in blood and brain matter. She said that he had boasted to them all that he had just killed an entire family before ordering her to clean his clothes. This part of her story was confirmed by her brother Zephyrin's testimony, though Dina Porter denied ever seeing any bloody clothes, but they all had good reasons to hope that Raymond would be charged for the crimes and kept behind bars. Raymond had a long history of alcohol abuse and physical abuse with his family. Just a month earlier, he had threatened to kill Dina Porter, a fact that she was forced to admit in court even though she was trying her best to defend him as much as she possibly could. and both of his children testified that they felt that their lives would be in danger if their father was released. All of this surmounted to a pretty chilling picture of Raymond's character, and would certainly have given the impression of someone who was capable of murdering an entire family, were it not for one witness. As was common in the time, houses were split and divided between multiple families, and the neighbors who shared the other half of the Barnabet home came out with direct contradictions to most of Clementine's testimony. This made Clementine's testimony look a little shaky, but after careful jury deliberation, Raymond Barnabet was found guilty of the murders and sentenced to hang. The rest of the Barnabets may have given a sigh of relief at this point, but Raymond's lawyers immediately filed for an appeal, and rather surprisingly admitting that their client had been drunk throughout his trial and was therefore incapable of giving a proper defense, and a new trial date was set. Because apparently at that time you could just say, "Hey, judge, I need a do-over. I was really hammered at that time." Because that's what happened. He would remain in jail until his new trial, and he was still there in November of that year when another African-American family was murdered. This time, 6 people were killed, and their murder would cast enough doubt on Raymond Barnabet's guilt that the charges against him were dropped. They did, however, lead to a rather surprising new suspect, Clementine Barnabet. Clementine was a member of the Church of Sacrifice, a movement that put great emphasis on the parts of the Bible that included and explained the need for sacrifices. And one of their preachers claimed that after members of his congregation committed sacrifices, they would no longer be held subject to the laws of man. And that wasn't all. Clementine lived only a block away from these latest murders, and blood was found on the latch of the rear gate and then later on her clothes. A few others were arrested in connection with the murders and held overnight, including her brother, Zephyrin. Tests done on the blood and matter found on Clementine's clothes matched samples taken from the Andrews family murders, the murders that she had helped get her father convicted for. The arrests of Clementine and Zephyrin sent local African-American communities into a state of panic. Some people used this as an opportunity to harass and threaten others. Ministers and church officials were constantly being arrested and released, and a local voodoo man was even killed while resisting arrest for charms that he was selling that he claimed would ward off evil from people's homes. But during Clementine and Zephyrin's incarceration, the murders continued. In January 1912, another family was murdered in their home with a quote, "When he maketh inquisition for blood, he forgetteth not the cry of the humble," was written on the wall. But this didn't stop Clementine from confessing to the murders of 35 people. She claimed that a priestess from the Church of Sacrifice had given her and her friends hoodoo charms that would help protect and shield them from law enforcement and would grant them superpowers so that they could commit these murders. Her confession was a little all over the place. Sometimes she claimed that she committed these murders alone. Sometimes she claims that she committed them with others, even going so far as to name some of her accomplices. But eventually, only Clementine was taken to court for the crimes. Her lawyers argued for her to be not guilty by reason of insanity, or at least the equivalent to it at the time. But it was difficult to defend her when Clementine took the stand and said, quote, "I am the woman of the sacrifice sect. I killed them all, men, women, and babies, and I hugged their dead bodies to my heart, but I am not guilty of murder." She then fought her own attorneys to make sure her confession was included in court records, and she claimed that if she was to be executed for her crimes, then an angel in a chariot made of fire would come to save her. She was found guilty of the murder of one victim and sentenced to life in prison in October 1912, almost a year to the day when her father was found guilty of the Andrews family murders. 9 years into her sentence, she was mentioned in an article about the Louisiana State Penitentiary where medical experts disclosed that she was diagnosed as a pervert. It was also said that prison surgeons had performed an operation on her that had cured her and returned her to, quote, normal. It was never disclosed what sort of operation she was given. First thought would be, oh, she got a straight-up lobotomy, but it's unlikely because those wouldn't start happening in the U.S. for another 10 years or so. She was sent to a women's camp in Angola where she remained for another few years until she was quietly released back into the wild in 1923, only to disappear from history books. Already during her lifetime, doubts about her guilt had begun to spread, and modern investigations name others, including a serial killer named Paul Mueller as the main suspect, and cite her early release as authorities believing in her innocence even then. but we may never know for sure just how much involvement she had in this string of murders that took place between 1911 and 1912. That's 10-Minute Murder for today. Brief and bingeable true crime. Thank you for listening, and as I mentioned at the beginning, if you are new to this podcast, be sure that before you go, you become a subscriber to this podcast. One of the biggest perks is it's easy to find when you want to listen to it. You just open the app and then boom, you'll see it right there in your list of subscribed to podcasts. Also, if you've got friends that are into brief true crime stories like the one you heard today, let them know about 10-Minute Murder. And the biggest way, if you're wanting to find a way to help the show, you can either send me big fat checks. I'll take those big fat checks. Those are fine with me. I'm just kidding. Don't send me money. But you can leave 5-star reviews and ratings anywhere that you can do that. And I just recently found that you can do that on Audible. I knew that the podcast was available on Audible, and I was listening to a Stephen King book the other day, and I thought, hey, I'm going to check out, see what my podcast even looks like on Audible. And I went over there and saw that there are reviews. So if you listen on Audible, by all means, leave a review. You can also leave reviews on Apple, Spotify. You can do the stars. You don't type in words. You just put the stars up. Any and all of that helps the show grow and reach more and more people, and I really do appreciate it. Thank you for listening to 10-Minute Murder. Be safe and make good choices.